Hey, Paul, he said it's better. There's a few more up front. I promise none of the speakers bite hard. Oh, blue light. All right. If you feel like you don't want to necessarily sit right in the front, you can grab one, and there's a couple empty spots in the side over here. You can move your way to the side if that makes you more comfortable. All right. Well, thank you all for coming this evening. Let's make sure we're technically ready to go. We're good? Are we running? All right. My name is Chris Groshong, and I am the founder of Coinstructive, which is a small boutique blockchain company that does blockchain forensics investigations and compliance for Bitcoin ATM operators. So we're kind of like a crypto private eyes, which is kind of weird because I never thought I'd be that. But I'm happy to be here as a honorary Edge team member because Paul always includes me in things and for all the Edge events that they do. So I'm just excited again to be here with all of you and see so many familiar and friendly faces and new faces. Lots of new people here today and people still pouring in. This is great. Glad that we were everybody was able to get something to drink and wet their whistle and have some pizza perhaps. So that's great. I'm glad you guys are all here. So first off, I would like to thank Edge for sponsoring. Can we get a round of applause for Edge as Madison comes on up? So I'm going to bring to the stage Madison, and Madison's going to fill us in on what's going on.
All right, awesome. Thank you for being here. We're going to have to order more chairs for next month. This is awesome. This is great. Yes, so Edge is sponsoring. Coronado Brewing Company is also sponsoring, so cheers to that. I just want, here's for beer. I just want to reiterate, if you enter our raffle giveaway, we are giving away $50 in Bitcoin. Not 50 Bitcoin, unfortunately. And then also two other smaller prizes. So go ahead and enter that. And if you do download Edge tonight, find someone with an Edge shirt. They will give you $5 just for being here and being you. So go ahead and make sure you do that as well. And I'm going to pass it over to Paul so he can say a couple words.
Great. Thanks a whole lot. Let me get up here. Just want to give a big welcome to everybody over here to the Edge offices, and thanks for coming out to the meetup. This meetup group's been cranking out events since 2013. Definitely thanks to Chris. He's put a lot of effort in helping organize. And with that, we'd of course love to have other people assist with organization, everything from logistics to helping coordinate with potential other speakers or contact other speakers. It's been a great piece of what's put the community here in San Diego together, as well as even various projects and companies. All of the co-founders of Edge actually met through the meetup community. That's how we came together, and so we want to give back and help support it, and hence why we're here and helping support the event with the facility and, drinks and food and whatnot. A little bit about the company. So Edge, for those of you that might not be familiar with us, we are a mobile app that lets people buy, sell, and trade cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and many others. The stark difference between Edge and a lot of the other apps you might find or the other companies you might find is that you hold your own funds. That's kind of the big value proposition that Bitcoin gave when it was first invented. And we want to retain that value proposition inside of the app and really promote that, because that's what gives crypto a lot of its utility. Send crypto, Bitcoin anywhere in the world, hold your own funds, and definitely increase a significant amount of your privacy. So definitely give it a try. And as Madison mentioned, look for someone in an Edge shirt, and you're likely to find someone that works for the company, although there are a few Edge shirts that might be just stuff that we gave away. Create an account and we'll send you a little bit of crypto so you can experience it yourself. And with that, one other announcement is as well, we are hiring. So we have a few open positions, everything from engineering to some marketing positions. If people are interested, definitely take a look at our LinkedIn page, or you can also talk to Madison, who does HR. She handles a lot of our initial screening for hires. So let us know. We'd love to bring some people on board, especially those local here in San Diego. So thanks a lot, and I'll pass it back to Chris.
Thank you, Paul. Wonderful, kind words, Paul. Thank you. Honestly, the same goes for you. Without you, I don't think I would be in the position that I'm in today, and this community wouldn't be here where it is today without you and the sacrifices that you've made to be here, to put this company on the map, and San Diego to keep us on the map somewhat as a crypto company. So first off, I'm really excited for our guest today because, one, I don't really know that much about NFTs, I'm not gonna lie. So this is gonna be, I'm gonna be just learning probably as much as some of you. And some of you may know just as much or more than the person who's gonna be talking tonight. But either way, the introduction that I wanna give is for Emilio Cazares, who is now the general counsel of SuperRare. And Emilio and I first met because of our connections here in San Diego to Cal Western Law School. And Professor James Cooper, and the San Diego Blockchain Forum was the organization that Emilio started to kind of bring together like the legal community to focus on big topics. So I would imagine that if this project was still going, and I still think that it has a heartbeat, it's just kind of, there's been other things that have happened. So as you can tell, like with a lot of things, and start out with good intentions, but maybe they don't always get enough push behind them to really make it worth continuing on, especially when opportunities like becoming general counsel of SuperRare present themselves. So that being said, it's still a wonderful project, and I've met a lot of great people and got to really know Emilio during that time and saw what he could actually do and how well he was organizing events in the community and bringing people together from all over. He was doing a fantastic job, and he was basically making a name for himself. And so it's been really fascinating to see him kind of start his career, grow it, and then see where he's ended up right now. And he's still on his way up. The trajectory is very high for this guy. So without saying anything else, I'll let him come up on stage and let him speak about how SuperRare and NFTs are going to change the world.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks. Hey, everybody. I'm Emilio. Thank you for that kind introduction, Chris. I'm going to put my beer down right here next to some outlets. That seems safe. Yeah, so hi, everyone. My name is Emilio Cazares. I am the chief legal officer of SuperRare Labs, which is the company that created the SuperRare network. I guess before I start, can I get a show of hands, like who's familiar, I guess, with SuperRare? Oh, perfect. Wow. Is anyone a user or like a collector on SuperRare? There we go. I like that. Well, thank you, sir, from all of us at SuperRare Labs. I appreciate your participation. Yeah, as Chris mentioned, we have run into some of the similar circles here in San Diego, involved in some of the efforts behind, trying to create interesting policy discussions around decentralized technologies, crypto, and at the time NFTs, and I guess that was kind of pre-NFT craze. So it's good to be where I am now, and it's good to be here in this room with all of you. Thanks to the Edge people as well for hosting this incredible event. And for inviting me to come speak to you all. So I don't really have any rigid formula or presentation planned for you today. I plan on spitballing and brainstorming organic conversation. If you have any type of questions, feel free to shout them out. Happy to make this a round table, even though I'm on stage.
Yeah, we will be able to circulate. Oh, we might have to level the mics, but yeah, we'll circulate mics around so you can pass this around. This is being recorded, so we'd like to get those questions mic'd so that the people who go to listen to this later will get it. Other than that, yeah, it's going to be very open forum. So just raise your hand and I'll run around as much as I can. Let's let him start a little bit first, Trevor. Okay.
So I'll start, I guess, with a brief career introduction, just so you guys can kind of contextualize my role in this space. I started off as an engineer at UCSD, didn't really know anything about crypto. My buddy was mining for Bitcoin and Litecoin at the time, and I remember him explaining crypto to me, and it seemed not very controversial to me. I just remember thinking like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like they should run the economy on this thing. Like this sounds great. This sounds great, and I assumed it would be, you know, in place as soon as I graduated, but obviously, as everyone in this room understands, it's not necessarily the norm quite yet. After graduating as a mechanical engineer from UCSD, I decided kind of on a whim to pursue a law degree. So I went to a USD law. Any a USD alum here? There we go. There we go. Is the Cal Western crowd a little bigger here? There we go. I'm a friendly with Cal Western, so you're in good company here. Yeah. So I went to law school. I got really obsessed with kind of like abstract policy. I was kind of less interested, I guess, in practicing law, and I was more kind of interested in just talking about it and discussing and whatnot. It was very quickly on where I realized I kind of had an affinity for intellectual property, which, if you kind of conceive of NFTs, they're basically just a digital form of intellectual property protection or intellectual property ownership. And it was very early on, before I guess the NFTs, where I started to see the connections. It seemed obvious to me that they would start to settle IP agreements over the internet with decentralized technologies, whether that's smart contracts or whatnot. I kind of foresaw that, or conceived of a world where, you know, like peer-to-peer value exchange and content streaming, but done on the blockchain. It kind of made a lot of sense, and it had I think firm applicability if you think about kind of the way that content is aggregated in the current digital landscape. You have aggregators like Spotify and iTunes who have kind of the overhead to be able to secure all the IP so that they could stream it to all their users in a centralized manner. But with the invention of the Bitcoin blockchain, it kind of makes sense. Hey, like, why don't you just stream directly from the content creator to the consumer and do like a private ordering exchange where you can instantly settle these what are essentially IP transactions, right? When you stream something on Netflix, that's an IP transaction. You have a license to view intellectual property, and there's all types of right holders behind that IP, right? And those IP holders are identified in contracts somewhere, but the flow of value goes to Netflix, and then Netflix, you know, spends the money to the rights holders, however it's done, and I'm sure it's not necessarily done with exact fairness principles in mind. So I really got excited about IP and the blockchain. After law school, I started to practice as a patent and intellectual property attorney at the law firm of Shepard Mullen, which was at the time the dream job. I thought I was cool because I had a big law job, and I realized very quickly that, you know, it was I developed a jaded perspective because I realized that my role was to charge the clients money, and that's not necessarily what I wanted my job to be. So I really put my head down and tried to pursue the things that intellectually interested me, and that was a blockchain and decentralized technologies. I began an organization called the San Diego Blockchain Forum, which I had a lot of help and participation with Chris, and we ran some interesting events. We met some interesting people, and I think we had a lot of meaningful discussions, which are, you know, our hope to we hope to continue in the future. But through those kind of like interactions and conversations, I ran into the founders of SuperRare Labs, and it turns out that we actually all went to the same high school, ended up having some really interesting conversations about IP on the blockchain, and they wanted to work with me. So I brought them into the big law firm, thought that it was very exciting, thought that the firm would be proud of me, but the firm made it somewhat difficult to work with them because they didn't understand what was happening in this space, and they thought it was. I remember having to deal with it. Well, if you can copy and paste the NFT, then why would you buy it? And they're like asking the client that, and I'm just like, oh no, that's not why they pay us. That's not what they're asking us. They're asking us other things, not the value proposition of NFTs. those were the days. So I quit very quickly after that. I started my own firm where I represented one single client, and that client was SuperRare. And it was a big risk for me, but it was I guess worth it in the end, because they eventually offered me a spot around 8 months after that. I got to work on a few cases too in the blockchain space as well, but they were obviously my best client, and here I am now as their chief legal officer. So that's how I come to you, or I come up before you today. But I want to provide you all some context around like the platform and NFTs. I'm sure a lot of people are curious about this movement and seeing the hype, seeing the extreme speculation around these assets, but also there's a counterculture that is firmly developing and firmly rooted in this ecosystem. And NFTs really gave a lot of people perspective, and they gave a lot of people a voice to shine in a space where their voices were muted, so to speak. So for those of you don't know, NFT stands for non-fungible token. It is virtually, identical to a digital asset in like the Bitcoin understanding, in the sense that it's impossible to disprove ownership, and it's very easy to prove ownership. You can prove ownership over a digital asset in the Bitcoin sense, and it's the same in the NFT sense. Only what you're proving ownership of is something unique, something that has a signature from an identified issuer, and something that contains some type of information that gives that asset unique and valuable properties. In the context of digital art, that uniqueness is the expression of art itself, right? There's something unique about a painting. You can't just exchange a Picasso for a Monet, even if they're the same value, right? If they're both worth $2 million, they're not necessarily interchangeable, and for that reason, we call them non-fungible. But in the digital art context, NFTs served a very, very, very particular need, because we had a bunch of digital artists, and a lot of these artists either served as creative directors or just bedroom digital artists, and they're creating amazing work, right? Amazing generative art, interesting types of perspectives, whole new types of existentialism expressed through digital mediums, which were fascinating, but not commodifiable, right? Like, these artists basically were without a solution to sell their artwork as unique digital assets, because there wasn't the architecture of blockchain. But then in 2018, SuperRare Labs, at the time they were called Pixura, they deployed a smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain that allowed people to mint digital assets, mint NFTs. So that essentially means that a digital wallet, the owner of the address would upload a file, would type in some information about the file, right? The year it was created, the name of the work, some notes, a description of the work, et cetera, and they would package that all up and mint that as a digital asset. ERC 721 was the standard. Well, not at the time, but it is now. And it resonated with the community. The very first artist on the platform is actually an artist by the name of Robbie Barrett, who created these AI-generated nude artworks that, at the time, the only way to receive those artworks was if you attended a particular event hosted by Christie's Auction House. And now, if you kind of dive into these paintings, you'll see that the secondary value, or the secondary market value of these digital pieces has absolutely exploded, which is like a really interesting, right? Because people are seeing this shift in digital ownership and digital art as a contextual shift for artwork, for culture, and NFTs are right at the center of that. So the smart contract was deployed, and it got organic type of traffic. A digital artist and creators alike started to experiment with it, started to play with it. Selling artworks for 0.01 ETH at the time seemed like a big deal, and everyone was excited. But no one was really expecting anything to take off quite like it did. But then I guess, with 2020, we've seen kind of this explosion in NFTs, and that's actually when I joined the team. And it's been an unprecedented amount of interest in this space. We've seen all types of competition across the board, from Nifty Gateway to Foundation, Known Origin, all types of other platforms that are more or less trying to do the same thing that we're doing, but it kind of with a different spin. And to give you some context about our marketplace, the way that it works essentially is like, these artists who are whitelisted by our smart contracts. So we're like a curation platform. We only whitelist artists who are invited to join, and we evaluate that based on their artistic merit or whatever. Our curation team handles all that. But these people or artists will mint artworks, and then there's a marketplace that's completely supported by non-custodial smart contracts that allow people to buy, sell, auction off works, all types of these marketplace mechanics that are completely non-custodial and deterministic, which was a very powerful proposition for the art world, because if you wanted to market and sell your art in like the historical context, you needed like contacts. You needed to know somebody, right? You needed to have either a patron or a Rolodex of potential collectors. It was a reputation oriented game where reputation was bought and paid for. And then if you made it to the auction house, the auction house is not only going to collect a 15% commission off the sale, but they're also going to not guarantee the provenance of the thing you're buying, right? I could buy an artwork for several $1 million, and that artwork could very well turn out to be not the thing that I thought it was, right? And not the thing that the auction house thought it was either. Art forgery on the internet art forgery for paintings is like an incredibly complex problem that costs billions of dollars a year, essentially, where people just don't get what they think they paid for. The cool thing about blockchain is that it's really impossible to it's very easy to prove a provenance of a digital asset, right? You can mint this work and you always know who is responsible for this work, who was the creator of this work, identified by their wallet address. And that the wallet address is essentially the artist's reputation on chain. Every piece of digital content that flows from that address is that artist a creation. And no matter where that moves on the Ethereum blockchain, if it's auctioned, if it's sold, if it's transferred, if it's privately bought, kind of in an off-chain, a transaction, but transferred on-chain, all these types of things that can happen to this asset, the buyer can always have confidence, or a smart contract can always know who the actual owner is. And that is the fundamental principle by which SuperRare really succeeded, and I think the initial value proposition of these NFTs was that you can show that provenance, you can show that authenticity, and that was a powerful thing in the art context. But NFTs kind of take it a step beyond, because now you're not only able to show kind of who is the authentic owner of this artwork, or who is the authentic creator of this artwork, but you're able to program things into the artwork itself, which is a really exciting thing that we're seeing in the generative art context as well. Like, people can create programs that create art, or create art that is dependent on real world variables. Like, I can create a piece of art that takes into account like annual incarceration rates and plugs that into an algorithm and changes the artwork accordingly, right? And people can buy the art not only with this kind of appreciation for what it is now, but this speculation as what it might become. A very important a crypto artist named Matt Kane, who is like a Bitcoin fanatic, actually created this very, very, very famous piece in the crypto art world called Right Place, Right Time. And it's like essentially this multi-layered picture of the Bitcoin symbol, but it takes into account like all types of complex changes in the price, and it abstracts like the marketplace fluctuations of Bitcoin, and those fluctuations are represented in the artwork itself, which it makes people want to watch it each day, right? It makes people want to kind of like see like, what does it mean when Bitcoin goes up in value? It's like, well, this artist is trying to express that, right? Which is kind of an exciting thing about programmable art. But it's even cooler when you can own it in a digital context. And that's something that I think challenges a lot of people and a lot of skeptics of NFTs. Like, what does it mean to own something in digital space? And that, I think, I'll take a step back and try to like approach that question with some I don't know, some hypothecation and some abstract thinking here, right? Like, what does it mean to own something if everybody can view it? Like, is it valuable? Do you think so? Anybody? The ownership is value, right? Being able to prove ownership is valuable, right? If you own something, if you just own a file that was sent to you, not in an NFT or not as a digital asset, you own that, but other people can share it, other people can send it, other people can view it, other people can copy and paste it. So your ownership is not exclusive, right? Or your enjoyment of the content is not exclusive. You don't have an exclusive right to view it because everybody can view it, right? But what you do have is exclusive title to that a digital asset that's associated with it, and that's a powerful thing in the blockchain context, and it's something that obviously there's a demand for, as we've thus far been able to support a vast ecosystem of collectors who all see this NFT a movement, not just as a trend or not just as this fanciful thing, but really as like a shift in the culture, in a cultural understanding of what is art. And that's been a powerful thing that SuperRare kind of accidentally fell into. This journey was not necessarily intended. The founder, John Crane, I guess on the origin story of SuperRares, was saying, oh, they're making decentralized exchanges for money. What if we just made a decentralized exchange for pixels? And that's essentially what it was, right? It was just a DEX for pixels, which is kind of an exciting thing to think about, and an exciting thing to try to understand as the internet grows, because we're increasingly approaching this apex in the metaverse versus real world parallel, where what is real, what is fake. Things are going to gradually move into the metaverse context. Goods are going to be bought and sold. The venues are going to be filled in the digital context. All this movement is happening in digital space, but what's it worth if you can't show ownership? What's it worth if you can't put a flag on the ground? To some people, not much, but to others, there's kind of an appreciation for ownership in digital space, and that is what NFT and the architecture of this type of technology really supports, is that ownership in digital space. Now, I'm kind of speedballing a lot of concepts out there, so I hope you're staying with me, but I'll try to kind of express some important things that I think are relevant in understanding in the crypto art context. And the first is scarcity, right? Digital scarcity is kind of like somewhat of a paradox, right? If I can copy and paste without limit in a digital context, so things are infinite and therefore not scarce, but NFTs are kind of like the counter proposition, where it's like, no, you can prove a digital ownership and it can be a scarce asset. So we at SuperRare Labs truly believe in scarcity, right? Like, we want all artworks to exist as a single edition, one of one. There's no other one quite like it, right? Other platforms do open editions or multiple editions, where they'll sell 100 of the same thing, or they'll sell as many as they can sell within a time frame, and then cut off a supply at that point, so that there's 100 or 1,000 or even more floating around. Nifty Gateway, kind of one of our more controversial competitors, employs that model, which is kind of interesting, right? It's like, what is the secondary market for a digital asset of which there are 1 million just like it, or 1,000, right? Or even just 2, right? It's not that exclusive ownership. We, on the other hand, really believe in the one of ones. We think that there's not really much of value if things aren't unique. Therefore, everything should be minted as a single edition. And so what we have our artists do is they undertake essentially a legal covenant, a legal obligation to not mint other artworks, right? And it's kind of like, it's tough, because how do you enforce that, right? An artist, with the open nature of smart contracts and blockchain, can easily just mint as many as they want. But the cool thing about art and the cool thing about this ecosystem is that everyone has to answer for their reputation. And if people start to violate the rules on which the ecosystem is built, a reputation suffers. And if their reputation suffers, then the price of their NFTs is going to go down, or they're going to be eradicated from the marketplace through private social forces, which is obviously not what they want. So we haven't really had any problems with it, and as a result, we think that collectors really see a value in these early super NFTs, in these scarce antiquities. It's kind of interesting to think about antiquities like an Egyptian vase or like some type of old object. It's like those old objects are being created now in the digital context, and it's kind of an interesting thing to ponder. And it's things that collectors in the metaverse future are going to show off in their private virtual museums and virtual galleries, and that's kind of already happening if you kind of observe what is happening in Decentraland, for example. All these types of virtual worlds where people are starting to display their NFTs and to link their NFTs in a virtual context, to sell their NFTs, or to like sell access to a viewing room in virtual space where a smart contract is like paying people in real time for enjoying digital content. All these types of ways of experiencing art are slowly moving to the blockchain, and it's happening with a lot of excitement and a lot of passion from artists and collectors alike of our platform. So any questions so far? Yes, sir.
So I have two questions. The first, I read about DAOs buying NFTs. Can you talk about that as to how that mechanism works? And then the second question is, DAOs buying NFTs. And the second question is, you mentioned curation. So are you guys acting like a Sotheby's or Christie's in curating and kind of gating artists? And what's the criteria set?
Yeah, of course. And those are two actually excellent questions. So the first question was a reference to DAO ownership of digital assets. There's kind of a trend happening where DAOs can kind of coordinate a decision making around acquiring NFTs, and it's actually a really compelling example for a DAO. For those of you who like follow the DAO space, I feel like there's a lot of different types of DAOs, but the ones that are the most successful, in my opinion, are the ones that really parameterize like the output of the DAO, like really narrow what it's able to do, as opposed to like trying to create a DAO that's going to solve a global warming, right? It's like you can have this decentralized organization that can move money around, but like you still need to coordinate real world actors and real world problems in meat space, right? And that's hard to do with code. That's something that I guess Nick Szabo in like his earlier writings about smart contracts identified as a problem. Like you can, and Lawrence Lessig as well, like you can create the protocols for the digital space, but they're only going to operate in that space. If you want to coordinate human behavior, you need to involve human actors, and human actors in this context are judges and regulators and things that I guess crypto people shy away from. But in the NFT context, it's really interesting because now you have a use case that's where the property ownership isn't land, right? It's other types of digital assets that a DAO can see and interpret and understand. So what we're seeing in this space, and I guess with the primary example being a DAO like Flamingo DAO, which is spun out of the Lao, which is like a crypto VC DAO, I guess. But they're starting to create these like collection DAOs, right, where you fractionalized a governance interest into tokens, and then you have these token holders make decisions about which NFTs to buy. And the DAO will acquire those assets, and then the DAO will then get the decision makers, those token holders, to vote on how and what to do with that property, whether they store it forever because they're bullish on the artist, or whether to flip it, where you can get real-time profit sharing on the profits to all of the participating or perhaps all of the token holders. So you can kind of coordinate a decision making around acquiring IP, which is a really compelling example for a DAO. And and that's not really all that you can do, right? You can use DAOs to commission artworks, right? And where you can get people to pool up money to pay particular artists who will be through smart contract settlement obliged to send their NFTs to the DAO in order to receive their payment. And now the DAO has this unique commissioned artwork that it can decide what to do with. And there's still some like off-chain coordination, right? Because people are going to discuss over the phone, like, or over the phone. Who uses the phone? I guess over a Zoom call, over Skype. Not in person, that's for sure. But the people are going to communicate and evaluate a strategy and see what they want to do with the artist, with that particular artwork. So there still is that type of like off-chain intellectual strategizing. But at the end of the day, all of the relevant stakeholders can see all of the activity associated with the DAO, so they can understand which artworks it's purchased. And in fact, there could be constraints on the DAO, so it's like it's not able to do things on chain unless it has the requisite vote, right? So that's a very powerful and compelling example, and something that we're going to see more and more, something that is developing on top of our ecosystem, because a lot of these collectors are realizing that they can collect better together, and that is what they're going to do. And in fact, there isn't anything that stops an account on SuperRare from just becoming a DAO, right? And starting to buy and sell on the SuperRare art marketplace, and I'm pretty sure it's happening already. So that it's a compelling example for a DAO, and something that we're really excited to see build more and more, and there's already kind of organic traction for. Now, for the second question regarding curation, the gentleman had asked whether or not he considered us to be like a Sotheby's or a Christie's, who, if you don't know, are kind of like these centralized auction houses that, I guess, have perverse incentive, like any central authority. They have incentive to act for themselves, right? And to some extent, yes, we do behave like that, in the sense that we only whitelist people that get an invite, right? We've made a policy, a decision early on, that we're not going to be an open platform. An open platform would be like OpenSea or Rarible, these NFT ecosystems where anybody can just mint and sell. Our founders kind of understood that, they wanted the prestige of exclusivity, and they wanted to make sure that the content was good. But it was hard to reconcile that decision without kind of appreciating it's like, whoa, we're centralized now. Like, we're the gatekeeper. You can't get on SuperRare unless you go through us. And that gives us perverse incentive, because if we don't like you, we don't get the hell out of here. We don't want you on our platform, right? So we, I guess, realized that it was an unsustainable model, even though it was the model that I, in my opinion, really allowed us to capitalize on a reputation, which is, I think, the most valuable thing in the NFT context, a reputation. And if we have good art, if we have good throughput of digital content, people are going to buy it, and people are going to think that we're the only place to get it, which to some extent is true, right? But we realized that it was unsustainable. And we realized, and I guess the vision was always so, to become a decentralized curation model. And if for anyone kind of, I guess, paying attention to the NFT news will know that last week, actually, the Rare DAO, or the SuperRare DAO Foundation, launched a token called Rare. It's, I guess, like a week old today, I want to say. Is today Tuesday? That's right, yeah. Because we're trying to pilot out a decentralized ecosystem where now curation is baked into the governance mechanic of a new token. And these token holders are now going to decide who gets on the platform, and who gets to kind of have a voice, have a say in this ecosystem, which is something that we're obviously extremely excited about, but something that we always saw as the most compelling outcome for this network, where we could still exist independently as curators, because people have begun to associate our curation team with artistic success and merit. But now other people can join, and other people can have their own space within our network where they can whitelist their own artists, and they can extract their own commissions and extract their own fees and promote their own artist. And so what we've deployed now is this thing that we're calling the space race. So it's essentially like people are going to propose to the network that they should get invited to have these on-chain functionality, these on-chain permissions. And then the token holders will vote in a certain amount of defined spaces, because we don't want to saturate everything too quickly. I think that would be destructive for the ecosystem. If you just open up, it'll just be chaos. So we're piloting out this thing where all these spaces will slowly get to join and build, but it's all a merit based. It's all the token holders get to actually say who gets to join. And it's a really exciting thing because we anticipate that these spaces are going to range from all sorts of actors, whether it's just like the original NFT psychos who are like, now trying to capitalize on the skill sets that they've built while the traditional auction houses have been sleeping. Those people are probably going to become like the new types of spaces. But we also expect that traditional entities, who all now, by the way, are just like totally into NFTs. We get like, so many inquiries and asks from auction houses, Sotheby's and Bonhams and Christie's, all to collaborate because they know, that the NFT market does, likes to give the middle finger to people like that. So they're trying to work with the NFT ecosystem in a strategic way. So we anticipate that they're going to propose to the network to have their own space. So it's this idea of decentralizing curation, but it's also baked in with kind of like economic incentives on top of it and an economic form of curation. And I should say, I guess at this point, I don't speak on behalf of the company in this capacity or on behalf of the network itself, because the network is now something that exists independently of our company. We were the genesis node of this network, so to speak. But now we've given control to the community. So what the network really does is not necessarily up to us. We can only influence it however we can as private actors in the network. But we see real opportunities for like economic and peer-to-peer curation, right? Where you as a user of the platform, when you like something or when you share something or when you refer something to a collector and it gets bought, it's like all of that is value added to the network. And ordinarily that's just a data that a centralized entity keeps and hoards and sells and uses potentially against you. But we want to reward you for that data. We want the network to identify the curators, who are the tastemakers in this new economy where everything is peer-to-peer. And you can be a curator in a lot of ways, right? You can be a curator by voting in a space into the network. You can be a curator by having a good reputation and following artists or liking artists, because everybody can kind of see like where the activity is coming from, and potentially you're rewarded for that. Or potentially maybe staking mechanics or other types of like crypto native signaling methods will give a user the ability to reap potentially the profits of a particular space as a commission, if that particular space says, hey, if you stake money on me, that means you believe in me, and whatever we make, we share with all of you. And that could be kind of like a form of like economic macro curation that we're excited to see develop. So there's a lot of ways that a network can take shape, but the idea is that we want curation model to be a decentralized. We want peers to kind of have a say in what goes on to the network, or potentially even what gets taken down, right? For those of you more familiar with DAOs, understand that it's kind of unpredictable and chaotic when you give life and meaning to a new community. You don't really know what they'll do. But in this context, like, we have a really supportive a community of artists and collectors who are all actively building, actively creating, and trying to make these dreams of decentralization come true.
A couple more questions. Here we go.
Yeah, I was just going to ask for people that are trying to get into the NFT space and figure out how to buy an NFT and what's the first NFT that you should buy. How do you know what to buy and what the value of an NFT should be?
That's a very good question, and if I knew, I'd write a book and probably make a good amount of money. But no, I'll give you what insight I can. So in terms of where, how to buy an NFT, all you really need is an Ethereum wallet, right? Do you have MetaMask? Boom. It's you're equipped. You're equipped to do what you have to do. The question is now, what platform you go to, right? There's a lot of NFT platforms, all with kind of a different angle, a different take, and kind of away from the platform, which is the platform model we're trying to get away with, right? Like anybody can create a marketplace smart contract, right? The code is all up there now. Like anybody can just deploy a marketplace in a snap of a finger. And now kind of what SuperRare is trying to do through its network efforts is to create like sovereign smart contracts. So like artists have their own contracts. Artists have their own platforms. It's not like a dependent on SuperRare. Everyone can exist independently. So pretty soon there might not even be platforms to choose from. But right now there's SuperRare, Maker's Place, Known Origin, Async Art, Foundation, and Nifty Gateway, who I mentioned them last because I guess that was because they're the most centralized. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend buying anything off their platform because they don't necessarily observe the authenticity and provenance principles that I think true crypto art necessitates. But anyways, you just go to the platform and you sign in with your MetaMask address, and then you have an infinite marketplace of all types of digital artworks with all types of marketplace features. You can buy something at a list price, which means that you just get it right when you buy it. You can put an offer on an artwork, which will sit in a non-custodial escrow. Like the Ethereum will sit there in an escrow until the artist decides to accept it, which is like a powerful type of use case. We kind of have just like this network and marketplace of offers and auctions and whatnot. Now, in terms of valuation is probably the biggest struggle because in the NFT space, the reality is that like the reputation of the collectors and the activities of people that like kind of know more than all of us, myself included, they kind of dictate what the value is in an abstract, indirect kind of way. People kind of say like, oh, these actors are spending lots of money on these artists must be valuable. But it's hard to discern whether or not that's an indication of value or an indication of the intent of that collector. Maybe they just want to dump all those works, or maybe they just want to create the illusion of value. It's really tough to tell. But to kind of like counter that, it's like it's tough to tell what anything is worth in the art context, right? It's like people see a picture of a rectangle and think it's, a worthless object that is a kindergarten, a kindergartner drew, but it could be worth millions of dollars for, if it's put in front of the right buyer. And I guess like this early notion of like what is value was kind of challenged by a really prominent artist on the network called Pak. He's one of like the biggest artists in the SuperRare network, kind of like one of the biggest artists in the world in the NFT context. And he had minted, it was just called Red, I believe, and it was just like a single red pixel. Like it was just, that was the artwork. And like it went, I want to say at the time it went for like 16 grand, which like isn't a lot anymore somehow. That's like, oh, that's not that much money. It's like, because now things are selling for like hundreds of thousands or whatever, but like it sold for 15 grand at the time and everybody was talking about it. Everybody was having that discussion about what is value, right? And it's like, now you have an NFT that has historical provenance that's like creating that conversation. So like, what is value anymore? Like that conversation is worth something, and that NFT created that conversation. So it's really, really tough to kind of have like a textbook answer for how you value NFTs. It really kind of depends on like who is minting it, right? Is it coming from the right account? Is it coming from the right address? That's obviously like a first question you should ask yourself because you don't want to get duped. But on top of that, it's, I think, mostly social forces that are determining what has value in the NFT context. But to give you kind of a counterpoint and like a glimpse into the future and kind of in where our heads are at is like these NFT markets support a lot of like, it's a robust and accurate a market for data around artworks, right? I can see the history of an artwork sold by an artist. I can see all artworks sold by that particular artist because I can just observe their address on the blockchain and I can see what NFTs are issued by the entity and how all those NFTs sold. If you wanted to do the same thing in the traditional art context, you'd have a very tough time, and you'd be having to deal with papers and handwritten notes, right? Because like the art world is very casual and very, things are supposed to be done with paper and pen and contracts, but formalities aren't necessarily observed in the traditional art world, so it's really, really bad, awful data on art. But in the blockchain context, it's really, really good and robust data. And so in the future, as things really progress, you're gonna it's gonna be a lot easier to value things. You're gonna be able to plug things into an engine, and an AI is gonna be able to tell you how much it thinks it's worth, right? So those types of tools are developing in kind of a compelling example for digital art. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. I really enjoyed all of it so far. Couple things. One, like, what I remember in like late 2017 was when CryptoKitties first came out, right?
Yes.
December, like the second week of December, and like 2 weeks later, the market crashed. And then, like, the only reason I bring that up is because, like, I want to know, like, how SuperRare is thinking about, like, the culture right now, right? You have Jay-Z, who has a CryptoPunk as his, like, Twitter profile picture. You have Gary Vee that's coming in. He has his, like, hundreds of NFTs. And just, like, the valuation, like you said, is a little crazy right now with, like, rocks getting, I don't know what type of valuation those have. And then, like, how, like, SuperRare is talking about that. And then also how SuperRare is talking about, like, obviously, like, the art industry is, like, entertainment industry is, like, super excited about it, right? Something with, like, the music and, like, the IP that you're talking about, how they're trying to, like, get that into the blockchain. And then not only that, but then, like, also what happens if, like, Ethereum isn't, like, the end-all be-all, like, the alpha omega of, like, smart contracts, right? There's plenty of, like, blockchains that are trying to, like, even copy BSC for one, Solana maybe, and then, like, yeah, Pulse Chain, like, just a bunch of, like, stuff that's coming out. And yeah, just your thoughts on all of that.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with, I guess, the first question, which was more related to well, there's kind of a lot of points there. So in the CryptoKitties case, it's like he's referring to CryptoKitties. Everyone familiar, I assume? I mean, everyone's here is mostly Bitcoin. Is that correct? Everyone here is like a Bitcoin maxis. Does Ethereum suck? No? Okay. So sometimes you can get, like, things thrown at you for talking about Ethereum. Gas fees, that's a whole other conversation. But gas fees is actually on point because what CryptoKitties did is that it drove a lot of traffic. It drove a lot of user behavior, but, like, it's not servers handling that anymore, right? It's the Ethereum blockchain. So as a result, Ethereum basically, like, crashed because of cartoon cats. And that was, like, a problem, but also, like, an exciting phenomenon at the same time, right? It's like, oh shit, like, people like cartoon cats. Like, what does that mean, right? People like cartoon cats enough to, like, pay a lot of money for them. So, like, that's kind of, like, I guess, like, in the mindset of, like this generation of people who's like, they want skins for their avatars, you know what I mean? They want the virtual bling. If you're familiar with CryptoPunks, then you know that, like, if you have a CryptoPunk as your avatar on Twitter or your profile image, it's like, that means you're the shit, right? Like, that you bought a crypto. I mean, if you don't own it and you have it as your Twitter profile, it's like, shame on you. But for those who do, it's like, it's social status, right? And social status exists in the digital space very much. It's the same thing as a Rolex. This is not a Rolex watch, but it's the same thing as a Rolex watch, a CryptoPunk. They're selling like hotcakes. Oh, well, they're selling for a lot of money, I should say. So, like, where we appreciate the culture of, like, more collectible style art as opposed to, like, fine digital art, right? There's kind of, like, they're two different things. Like, people could mint things as their own standalone a digital artwork, or they can mint, like, a generative art projects and avatars and other types of, like, characters and creatures that, like, people appreciate for their artistic achievement, for their technical achievement, because there's a lot of these, like, interesting projects that blend a randomness into, like, the equation. So, like, when you buy it, like, you get this unique thing that's, like, randomly assembled. So, like, if you got the rare traits, that's an exciting thing. And, like, the rareness of, a particular skin color or, like, a hairdo is valuable, and it's demonstrably scarce, which is an exciting thing, right? It's like, anyone open up Pokemon cards? It's like, there's something, it's like, oh shit, I got the rare one. And it's like, oh, like, that's cool. Like, that's, like, the same thing in the NFT context. So we appreciate the collectible aspect of it. That's not really what our platform is known for, but as we are decentralized, as we open up the gates and allow other spaces to decide for themselves what is valuable, we expect to see these types of projects, and we expect hopefully that it doesn't run Ethereum to the ground. I think that was kind of at like an early nascent stage of Ethereum and smart contracts that had a lot to do with that. But hopefully those problems don't necessarily occur. But if they occur because too many people are using a SuperRare, maybe that's not the worst type of news for us either. But regarding your point around like other people type of entering the space, you have Jay-Z and all types of celebrities. Paris Hilton now, I guess, is like the smartest person in the world on NFTs, which is interesting. So all these types of people are trying to capitalize on their own reputation. And that's kind of what I was talking about before. It's like NFTs are just reputation abstracted and minted on the blockchain. And like celebrities see the obvious value proposition of that because they know that they can just mint an experience with them, as an NFT, and they can have that direct connection with their fans. A lot of people are issuing out tons of NFTs as like an interesting way of, understanding who their collectors are and trying to like interact with them and engage with them. So like NFTs serve a compelling case in that way, but like at the same time, there's kind of like the resistance from the the true NFT OGs who kind of see a lot of culture robbing and a lot of like opportunistic behavior in the space, right? It's like, I'll give you an example. I mean, Grimes, for example. I mean, I love Grimes. I like her music and everything, but she minted like an open edition on Nifty Gateway with like a set price at $7,500, and she made probably like 8 million in one day, and it was just like, that's exciting and that's cool, but now all these assets are out there. No one knows what the secondary market value is like for them, and this person who doesn't have anything to do with NFTs just came in one day and got really rich and then left. And we just saw that happen over and over and over and over again. And a lot of like the hype around NFTs was because of this kind of like culture stealing type of activity that we saw from primarily like NFT outsiders, but like independent celebrities. So we don't necessarily see that as a problem. Like in my mind, it's like there is no outcome for entertainment or like internet media that doesn't in some extent rely on NFT architecture. So like this is just part of that opportunistic phase where people are just trying to get rich quick. But I ultimately can't complain about that type of activity because it's at least driving the volume into the space. But it is, I guess, leaving some jilted users and consumers who bought the Paris Hilton NFT but like can't find a buyer for it because they paid like $12,000 for it, and now they're just like, well, I own this, but I thought I was going to make money, but now I'm not making money. So like that's a problem. I hope that kind of captures or addresses some of the things you were talking about.
You had the other question though about kind of like should SuperRare have any parachain plans to like work with other blockchains?
Oh yeah. Okay, sure. That's actually a great point, right? If Ethereum is gone tomorrow, all of these digital assets, I mean, they'll technically exist in some capacity in the sense that you could prove who owned what at the time Ethereum failed, but there's not necessarily a market or a way to move those NFTs. So that's obviously a problem. So we are obviously like trying to think about a way to like bridge these assets to other types of blockchains, right? But there's kind of a weird world now. It's like we don't want a Tezos NFT to be exactly identical as like an Ethereum NFT, because now you have like two separate channels for this thing that's supposed to be digitally scarce. So like there needs to be adequate bridge mechanisms to ensure that like one can only exist while the other one is dead type thing. And that's like a little bit like beyond me for like I'm not really technically like exactly familiar with how that works, but like it's a challenge though to like bridge these assets into other blockchains because you don't want to defeat the scarcity principles that I was talking about earlier. But with that being said, we fully expect that the SuperRare network is going to want those types of solutions, and we fully expect for them to exist at some point. But right now, like a lot of the NFT activity is happening on Ethereum. Like I know that with like the rare Pepes and everything, that was like originally, I guess, like some Bitcoin colored coin, wasn't it? Like Bitcoin, I guess, was responsible for the OG NFTs, but there's not exactly like the biggest market for it. And I guess there's just a bigger market of collectors in the Ethereum a metaverse, just because I think, you know, all of the development activity and the software tools and the type of engagement and user experience driven type solutions on Ethereum really like are compatible with like, you know, entertainment and experience and things that like NFTs provide. So that probably explains why Ethereum is the biggest market, which is why, you know, we're not necessarily like in the biggest hurry to get off of Ethereum, because there's still tons of volume that has not entered into these markets. But you know, we want cross-chain operability at some point.
We got one more here, and then we have 15 minutes left questions.
Sweet, yeah.
Okay, I just have a quick, boring legal question. So, like, if I buy something on SuperRare, do I have any legal recourse if something goes wrong? Is it on? Yeah. Okay. So if I buy something on SuperRare and something goes wrong with that NFT that I purchased, do I have any legal recourse, either through the platform itself or with the artist that issued the NFT?
So when you mean something goes wrong,
Like, let's for example say, like you mentioned that you have these agreements with NFT creators where they are limited to the amount of works that they produce for a given NFT asset. Well, let's say like that artist gets hacked and somebody just mints a shitload of NFTs from their account, and then the value of their NFT goes to like zero. I'm a purchaser of that artist's NFT on your platform, therefore my asset's now gone to zero. Do I have any kind of like legal recourse there?
sure, yeah, and that's an excellent question, and one that is honestly like a developing answer, because there's legal like formalism in the sense that like I can explain whether or not you have a right to recourse, and then there's the actual like enforcement of that recourse, right? Where it's just like, where the hell is this artist? Who is this artist? All we know about this artist is that it minted NFTs from this address. Like, we don't necessarily know exactly who this person is, what jurisdiction they're in, what their address is. So enforcing that remedy may be tough. But I'll back up and talk about like terms of service, I guess, for the SuperRare platform. So our terms of service, I guess, transparently provide that, like, you know, you buy everything on as-is basis, right? It's like NFT ecosystem. It's tough to really at this stage to understand like what the long-term value of NFTs issued from a particular artist is going to be, because we don't know enough about that artist. The agreement when you buy an NFT is between the artist and the collector. The SuperRare platform is a decentralized ecosystem that doesn't stand in the way between that bargain. So we primarily see it as like a transaction occurring between the artist and the collector. So it's like, if you want recourse, the artist is the primary source of that recourse, because the artist is the one who violated the owed covenant in this context. Whether that means they minted several works of the same thing when they weren't supposed to, or whether that means, you know, they minted something that wasn't theirs in the first place. Now that's actually not exactly like the best answer, right? Because it's like, you as a collector might say, oh, well, I got screwed. This artist who I don't know violated that promise, and I have no way of extracting value from that artist. I have no way of settling this dispute. The only person that you can come to is the platform, right? And the platform is put in this kind of awkward scenario where it's like, well, we don't control the artist's behavior. We can't control the artist's behavior. All we can do is control who gets on and off the platform. So if there's a problem with an artist, if there's an artist who has, you know, a habit of creating problems for collectors, which is not the typical artist on the SuperRare platform, they can get kicked off, right? Because we're a curated platform, and we have terms of service and community guidelines, and we expressly prohibit certain types of activity. So if the artist is violating that, they get off the platform. But we can't necessarily guarantee that the artist is going to pay you, because we don't necessarily know who that artist is.
Yeah.
So the best type of recourse in that context is to publicly demonstrate that the artist is a fraud, because, like I said, reputation is the best type of is the most valuable thing in the NFT space. So if an artist has a reason to have a bad reputation, then those NFTs, I guess, you know, will, like, his or her career will plummet, and maybe they get ousted out of the space through social forces.
Sorry, we're gonna have to keep moving. We're almost out of time.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
got
of
time for
course.
one question, then we're gonna have to wrap up, and then you guys can meet afterwards with Emilio and wrap him.
Great.
So I'm a filmmaker,
And one of the most difficult aspects of what I do is distribution. Finding people who are willing to host. And a lot of the times what that comes down to is using something like a YouTube, because it's a centralized platform that allows for funds to be acquired through people viewing. But those types of partnership programs aren't necessarily advantageous to someone like me. And I've seen other platforms, other projects that are blockchain projects that are trying to create a decentralized place for videos to be hosted so that you can make money off of the videos that you're making. Do you see any sort of use case for NFTs in videos? And have you guys been working in that regard with any filmmakers or anything of that sort? Or seen any of that on other platforms, OpenSea, whatever, where people are making short films that are one-offs or beauty films or things that, you know, can be listed as an NFT?
Yeah. That's a great question, and it's important to, I guess, identify the use case of NFTs in the film context. So to answer your question, like, yes, right? It's like, well, first of all, arguably, film kind of exists on the SuperRare network already. Like, there are a lot of directors and other types of, like, film creatives that mint, like, short videos or, like, animated sequences that kind of, like, are their own standalone film in a way, like a hyper-condensed short film. So, like, it already kind of exists in the sense, but, like, it's not exactly capturing, like, the view count. Right, like you can sell an NFT and it's a standalone asset that has expressive content that you might find exciting. But what I think you're kind of getting at is like how much the market engages with that content ought to like provide you some value, right? In the YouTube context, if I can demonstrate, you know, I have 1 million views. Like a YouTube, I'm sure has some type of a breakdown where they say, well, you have 1 million views, you get this much money, and we're going to pay you that money, right? I think the real future of like the NFT world and films is like when you're able to like capture that engagement in real time and create payment rails to like stream value to the creator. So like in the YouTube context, it's like imagine if like views couldn't be faked, because like a YouTube could clearly fake views if they wanted to. They could also probably take away views if they wanted to, right? But if that was all happening on chain in a decentralized way where you could guarantee that views were views, and you can create algorithms that can source value from a treasury straight to the creator based on, I don't know, like however many views it gets in total, however many views it gets in a certain window of time. And then you can actually play with the formula and reward people on kind of like supply and demand curves and do interesting types of things where creators are being rewarded in real time and where they have an opportunity to accelerate other reputation and the demand for their work and by getting. So that's kind of like an exciting idea. And like another exciting idea like with film and NFTs is like the cool thing is like you can start to embed payment instructions to like the whole cast of characters. Like you have like the screenwriters and you have the actors and you have the cameramen and you have all types of people that work together to accomplish this thing. But when it hits the box office, and I don't really know much about the payment or about the film industry, but I imagine that like all of these people are getting cut out and they're just being paid up front and they're not necessarily like capturing the success of that film, right? But in the NFT context, it's like people can negotiate a royalty or negotiate a contractual right that's instructions that are embedded more or less in the NFT itself. So no matter where that NFT goes, no matter where it's streamed, no matter where it's paid for or played, the value is going to all of the people who participated in that creation without having